She pointed at me in front of 11 people and said the words like she'd been rehearsing them for weeks. And maybe she had. "Apologize to my sister," she said, "or get out of this house." The room went still. Not quiet still, like something had been unplugged. And I stood there, holding a glass of water I hadn't sipped in 20 minutes, looking at the woman I had married 14 years ago. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not because it was over. Because I finally understood what it was. My name is Daniel Graves. I'm 47 years old. I build commercial HVAC systems for a living. Nothing glamorous, nothing that fills a room when I walk in. I'm not loud. I've never been loud. My father used to say the quietest man in the room is usually the one who's already figured out the exits. I didn't know what that meant when I was 12. I understood it completely that Saturday night in our dining room in Buckhead, Atlanta, with 10 pairs of eyes waiting to watch me either break or bend. Let me take you back to how it started. Because it didn't start that night. That's the thing about a setup. By the time you recognize it, you're already inside it. 14 years. Cassandra and I had been married 14 years. And for the first 11 of those, I would have told you without hesitation that I had the kind of marriage people don't talk about at parties because it would make them feel bad about their own. Not perfect, not magazine cover, but real. We disagreed. We had dry stretches. We went through the thing you go through when you're two busy people trying to stay connected in the gaps between work and mortgage payments and the ordinary friction of a shared life. But underneath all of it, there was something solid, something I trusted. And then, about 10 months ago, that something shifted. I can't give you one moment. I can't point to a Tuesday and say there. That's when it changed. It was gradual. The way a house settles, you don't hear the foundation moving. You just notice one morning that a door doesn't close right anymore. She stopped asking about my day. Not dramatically. Just stopped. Conversations got shorter. Responses got thinner. I'd say something and she'd nod in a way that told me she hadn't actually heard it. I told myself it was stress. She'd been dealing with things at work. Her department had restructured twice in 8 months. I gave her space. That was my instinct. Give her room, don't crowd the silence, wait it out. I was wrong to wait. But I didn't know that yet. About 6 months ago, her sister Vanessa started coming around more. Now, Vanessa and I have never had what I'd call a warm relationship. She's not cruel, she's not unkind. She's just fiercely, ferociously devoted to Cassandra in a way that sometimes leaves no room for anyone else, including me. I'd always accepted that. Some people love hard and love narrow. I respected it even when it excluded me. But 6 months ago, something changed in how Vanessa looked at me. I can't explain it any better than that. The energy shifted. She'd come over for Sunday dinners and there would be these small moments, a glance exchanged with Cassandra when I left the room, a sentence that trailed off when I walked back in, a laughter that stopped a half beat too late. I told myself I was imagining it. I'm not an anxious person by nature. I don't catastrophize. But my body registered something my brain kept overruling. I started paying attention. Quietly. The way my father taught me. Now. The anniversary dinner. 14 years. Cassandra had planned the whole thing herself. That was the first sign she never did that. Every party we'd thrown, every gathering, every holiday, she'd pulled me in from the beginning. What do you think about this? Does this color work? Should we do buffet or plated? It was ours, not hers, not mine ours. This time I was told where to be and when. Nothing else. I didn't say anything about it. I just observed. Vanessa arrived 40 minutes before anyone else. I heard the door. Heard her voice, low and fast, talking to Cassandra in the kitchen. By the time I walked in, the conversation had stopped. They both looked up at me. Vanessa smiled, the kind of smile you practice. Cassandra handed me a dish towel and asked me to set the table. I set the table. Honestly, if you had told me that night that I was walking into something that had been weeks in the making, I'm not sure I would have believed you. Not because I was naive, but because I wanted to believe I was wrong. There's something in a person, even a careful person, that resists the truth when the truth is that someone you love has decided to hurt you. You keep offering the simpler explanation. You keep choosing the version of events that doesn't require you to grieve. The guests arrived. My brother-in-law, Vanessa's husband, Thomas. 3 couples we'd known for years from the neighborhood. Cassandra's aunt. A friend of hers from her old job named Priya. 11 people total. Seated, poured, plates being passed. And for about 20 minutes, it was fine. Normal conversation. Someone had been to Savannah for a long weekend. Someone's kid had just started at Georgia Tech. Small things, safe things. Then, Vanessa shifted it. She did it carefully, I'll give her that. It wasn't an attack, it was a story. Remember when you two were trying to refinance the place on North Side? She said, laughing lightly. Didn't the whole thing fall apart because of some paperwork issue? That never happened. We refinanced in 2021 without a single complication. But I didn't correct her. I watched Cassandra. Cassandra kept eating, didn't look up, didn't say, actually, that's not right, or wait, that's not how it went. She just kept eating. And something settled into place in me, cold and precise, like a key turning in a lock I didn't know was there. Vanessa kept going. A story about a vacation that got ruined. A mention of a friendship I had supposedly ended over nothing. A friendship I had, in reality, distanced myself from because the man involved had made a comment about Cassandra at a cookout that I won't repeat. Every story was plausible. Every story was adjusted just enough. Every story landed in the room like it was common knowledge. Cassandra, at one point, said quietly that I'd been a little checked out lately. Soft voice, sympathetic face, like it pained her to say it. People nodded. If you have ever sat in a room and watched someone carefully disassemble who you are piece by piece, story by story, in front of people who have no reason not to believe them, you know what that moment feels like. It's not anger that hits first. It's something colder. A kind of vertigo, like the floor you were standing on was never actually solid. You want to speak, you know how to speak. But you also understand that anything you say at that table, in that moment, will be used as evidence of exactly what they're describing. Too emotional. Difficult. See, this is what she has to deal with. So I stayed quiet, and I paid attention. Vanessa made her first direct move about an hour in. She put her fork down, looked at me across the table and said, I'm going to be honest, Daniel. Cassandra deserves more than what she's been getting. The room went still. Not quiet still. Thomas, her own husband, said nothing. He'd been unusually quiet all night. Too quiet. Even for a man who tends to hang back at gatherings. I'd noticed it when he arrived. Eyes not quite meeting anyone's. Something sitting wrong in his posture. I filed it away. Cassandra finally looked at me. And I want you to understand this, it wasn't the look of a wife in pain. It wasn't heartbreak or exhaustion or grief. It was focused, composed. The look of someone arriving at a prearranged destination. Daniel, she said, I think you owe Vanessa an apology. For what? I asked. My voice came out steady. I was glad for that. For everything, Vanessa said. For how you've treated her. For what this year has looked like for her. I looked back at Cassandra. I waited. One breath. Two. She held my gaze and said it again. Louder this time. Loud enough that no one at that table could pretend they hadn't heard. Apologize to my sister. Or get out of my house. And there it was. I stood up slowly. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't performing. I just needed to be on my feet for what came next. I walked toward her, not aggressive, not shaking, and I stopped close enough that I could see the small steadiness in her jaw that told me she had rehearsed this. She thought she knew how it ended. She didn't. You want an apology? I said. She nodded. Firm. Certain. Okay, I said. I'm sorry. The table exhaled. I could feel it, that collective release of tension, the satisfied sigh of a room that thought it had just watched the right person back down. Vanessa's chin lifted slightly. Thomas looked at the table. I didn't sit down. I'm sorry, I said again, that I didn't say anything 6 months ago. That landed differently. Cassandra's composure flickered just for a moment, just at the corners of her eyes before she caught it. What are you talking about? She said. Still controlled, still steady. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked at Vanessa. Then I looked at Thomas. And I said, I know about you and Cassandra, Thomas. I've known for a while. No one moved. Vanessa laughed one short, disbelieving sound. What? She said. What are you? 4 months, I said. I kept my voice even. I was not performing calm. I was calm because I had had 4 months to grieve this in private, to make peace with what I'd seen, to decide how I wanted to use it. I found out in February. I didn't say anything because I was still deciding what to do. The room was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator running in the kitchen. Cassandra stepped forward. Daniel, don't. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm just answering the question. You wanted honesty. Here it is. Vanessa looked at her husband. Thomas had gone white. Not pale white, the color of a man whose body has understood something his brain is still processing. She looked at him the way you look at something you're trying to recognize in bad lighting. Searching. Squinting. Hoping you're wrong. She wasn't going to be wrong. Thomas, she said. Very quiet. Very careful. Look at me. He didn't. That was the answer. I want you to understand what I was feeling in that moment, because I think it matters. I was not triumphant. I was not vindicated. I was watching a woman I had never truly been close to, but had respected, discover something in real time that I had had the mercy of discovering alone, in private, where no one could see my face. Vanessa didn't have that. And whatever I thought of how she had behaved that night, and I thought a lot of it, she didn't deserve to learn this here. But she had chosen this room. She had chosen this audience. And sometimes the stage you build becomes the one you stand on when the curtain drops on you. Vanessa picked up her phone from the table. Her hands were steady. I respected that about her. Even then, she pulled up Thomas's contact and called him. Right there, from across the table. His phone lit up in his jacket pocket. He reached for it out of reflex. She was already walking to him. She took the phone from his hand before he could decline the call. He didn't fight her. He didn't say anything. She knew his passcode, of course she did, and she opened his messages herself. 14 years of marriage means you know those things without thinking. She scrolled. One swipe. Then she stopped. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She didn't do any of the things a room might expect. She just stood there for a long moment, looking at whatever she was looking at, and then she set the phone down on the table with the same careful precision you'd use to set down a glass that might crack. She looked at Cassandra. How long? Cassandra said nothing. Vanessa nodded slowly, like the silence was its own answer, and it was. She reached for her purse. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair, and she walked out. No scene, no speech, no door slam, just gone, with a kind of quiet devastation that filled the room more completely than any argument could have. Thomas followed her a few seconds later, not to stop her, because there was simply nowhere else for him to go. And then there was just Cassandra and me and 9 people who had no idea where to look. She turned to me eventually. The composure was still there, but it was thin now, stretched. Why here? She asked. Why in front of everyone? I thought about that for a moment. You picked the audience, I said. You picked the night. You built the stage. I just didn't follow the script. She didn't have an answer for that, and I think somewhere underneath all of it she knew I was right. The story doesn't end with a dramatic fight. There was no screaming match, no tearful confession, no moment where she broke down and told me everything, and I held her, and we figured it out together. That's not what happened. What happened is that the room quietly, awkwardly dissolved. People found reasons to leave. Dishes were left half full. Goodbyes were short and strange. And Cassandra and I sat in our house, surrounded by the leftover evidence of a party that had failed its purpose, and said very little. What I want to tell you, and I mean this genuinely, not as a lesson you didn't ask for, but as something I've spent the months since learning, is this: silence is not the same as peace. I had spent 10 months interpreting Cassandra's distance as something I needed to fix in myself. I gave her space when I should have asked questions. I assumed good faith when the evidence was pointing elsewhere. And I don't say that to condemn myself, I say it because I think a lot of people listening to this right now are doing the same thing, choosing the comfortable explanation over the real one, giving someone the benefit of the doubt that they stopped earning months ago. The mistake most people make when something in their relationship starts to feel wrong is that they treat their own instincts like an unreliable witness. They cross-examine themselves. They look for reasons they might be overreacting. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes that generosity is exactly what the other person is counting on. What I eventually understood sitting in that quiet house after everyone had left is that what I had done at that dinner table was not revenge. It was not cruelty. It was simply a refusal to participate in a fiction. And sometimes, that's all dignity requires. Not a fight, not a scene, just the decision not to pretend. If you have ever been in a room where the story being told about you had nothing to do with who you actually are, if you have ever sat across from someone who looked at you like a problem, to be managed rather than a person to be heard, then you know the particular loneliness of that moment. And I want you to know, the impulse to stay calm is not weakness. It is not passivity. Sometimes it is the hardest, most deliberate thing a person can do. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. Vanessa filed within the same week Cassandra did. There was no negotiation, no back and forth, no prolonged court drama. Just paperwork, attorneys, the slow bureaucratic dismantling of a shared life. I kept the dog. She kept the apartment. We divided 14 years into 2 lists and signed our names. 3 marriages ended within a year of that night. Not because I said anything that wasn't true. Not because I was cruel or reckless. They ended because what was already broken finally became visible. All I did was stop pretending it wasn't. I've thought a lot about Vanessa since then. I've thought about what she believed she was doing at that dinner. I think she genuinely loved her sister. I think she had watched Cassandra pull away from her marriage and, rather than ask hard questions about why, she decided the marriage was the problem. And maybe that's what Cassandra had told her. I'll never know. But what I know is that protective love without honesty is just a more elegant form of enabling. Vanessa was so committed to rescuing Cassandra from a story that wasn't quite true that she never noticed what was happening in her own home. That's the thing this whole experience taught me. The most dangerous blind spot isn't the thing you refuse to see about the world. It's the thing you refuse to see about the people you love most. Here's what I want to leave you with, and I want you to sit with this, not just scroll past it. Where in your life are you telling yourself a comfortable story instead of asking a hard question? Where are you giving someone the benefit of the doubt because the alternative is too painful to consider? Not every situation is betrayal. Not every quiet shift means something is wrong. But your instincts exist for a reason. They are not your enemy. They are the part of you that has been paying attention even when you weren't ready to. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Drop a number in the comments. If you think I handled that night the right way, 1. If you think I should have confronted her privately, months earlier, 2. If you think you would have done it completely differently, 3. There's no wrong answer. I'm genuinely curious where you land. And tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing where this community is. What time is it where you are right now? Because sometimes I write these late at night and I forget the rest of the world is still moving. If any part of what I described tonight has ever touched something in your own life, a room where you felt invisible, a moment where the story being told about you wasn't yours, I'd be grateful if you shared it. Not for my sake. For the next person who needs to hear they're not alone in it. If you're new here and something about this story made you feel less alone tonight, consider subscribing. I tell these stories because they need to be told, and I'm not going anywhere. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental. She demanded, I apologize, I did. Then I looked at her sister's husband. My wife called me out in front of 11 people at our anniversary dinner. I stood up, apologized, then turned and looked directly at her sister's husband. Nobody at that table moved for 30 seconds. She pointed at me across our own dining room table and said, apologize to my sister, or get out of my house. She was my wife of 14 years. She was also the one who had planned every seat at that table and exactly what she needed each person to believe before the night was over. I had a wedding ring on my finger. I also had 4 months of silence stored up like ammunition I hadn't decided to use yet. What she didn't know, what neither of them ever stopped to consider, was that the quietest man in the room had already done the math. My name is Daniel. I'm 47 years old. I've spent my career installing HVAC systems across commercial properties in Atlanta, the kind of work nobody notices until something breaks. My wife's family always treated me a little like that too. Functional. Background. Easy to overlook. On a Saturday evening in October, Cassandra stood in front of 11 people she had carefully selected and asked me to humiliate myself on cue. That was the last dinner she ever hosted in that house. This is the story of what happens when you confuse a calm man with a defeated one, about an anniversary dinner that was never actually a celebration, about an apology that came with a second sentence nobody at that table was ready for, about a sister-in-law who built the stage, assigned the villain, and never once checked what was happening inside her own home, and about what it costs finally, permanently, when you spend 14 years assuming that someone's patience means they aren't paying attention.